There is a compound tested in a laboratory that killed bacteria on contact, including drug-resistant strains no modern antibiotic could stop. Several of these compounds come from plants you can grow in a pot on your windowsill for under $1. While scientists have synthesized versions of these plant molecules for research, they are not sold as discrete $400 prescription drugs. By the end of this video, you will know all 5 of these incredible plants and the fascinating science behind how they fight bacteria. Antibiotics transformed medicine in the 1940s. For 80 years, they were the unquestioned answer to bacterial infection. You got sick, you took a pill, you got better. That system worked for your parents, it worked for your grandparents, and right now that system is collapsing. The World Health Organization warns that antimicrobial resistance is a rapidly growing global crisis, with millions of infections becoming harder to treat with standard antibiotics every year. The bacteria learned how to survive the drugs faster than the pharmaceutical industry could invent new ones. 1.2 million people die every year directly from antibiotic-resistant infections. That is more than malaria, more than HIV. Nearly 5 million additional deaths are associated with resistance annually. These are not projections from some distant future. These are current numbers happening right now in hospitals from Dallas to Delhi. The pipeline of new antibiotics is drying up. Pharmaceutical companies are walking away from antibiotic research because the profit margin is too low compared to drugs that people take for decades. Heart medications, cholesterol pills, blood pressure drugs, those generate lifetime revenue. An antibiotic you take for 10 days does not. Meanwhile, the price of existing antibiotics keeps climbing. Walk into an American pharmacy without insurance, and the cost of cutting-edge or brand-name antibiotics can easily range from dozens to hundreds of dollars. Even common generic antibiotics face price fluctuations due to supply chain shortages. The system is breaking from both ends simultaneously. The drugs are becoming less effective and more expensive at the same time. Hospitals are running out of options for patients carrying resistant infections. Doctors are watching antibiotics that worked perfectly a decade ago fail in the petri dish right in front of them. The World Bank estimates that antimicrobial resistance will cost the global economy $1 trillion in additional healthcare costs by 2050. Trillion. That is the world you are living in right now, and nobody in a position of authority has ever told you what your great-grandmother already knew. For over 4,000 years before antibiotics existed, every civilization on Earth treated bacterial infections with plants, not with hope, not with prayer, with chemistry, specific compounds in specific plants that killed specific bacteria. Ancient Egyptian physicians documented plant-based infection treatments in the Ebers Papyrus around 1500 BCE. Chinese scholars compiled the Shenong Ben Cao Jing around 200 AD, listing dozens of plants with antibacterial properties. Indian Ayurvedic texts dating back nearly 4,000 years described infection treatments using roots and leaves that modern science has only recently begun to validate. Antibacterial. These were not primitive guesses. These were observations refined across thousands of years and tested on millions of patients across dozens of civilizations. When a remedy failed, the patient died and the remedy was abandoned. What survived those millennia of brutal testing was the chemistry that actually worked. Modern researchers have now taken those same plants into controlled laboratories. They tested them using the exact same methods used to evaluate pharmaceutical antibiotics: minimum inhibitory concentration tests, bacterial membrane assays, biofilm disruption experiments. The same standards, the same protocols, the same instruments. What they found should have changed everything. Several of these plant compounds matched or outperformed pharmaceutical antibiotics against drug-resistant bacteria in laboratory settings. Some showed effectiveness against MRSA, the superbug that terrifies hospitals worldwide. And here is the part that changes the entire equation. Bacteria develop resistance to these plant compounds far more slowly than to synthetic antibiotics. In some laboratory models, bacteria struggle to develop resistance to these complex natural mixtures compared to isolated synthetic drugs. Because a whole plant extract contains dozens of active compounds attacking at once, it is much harder for bacteria to evolve a quick genetic workaround. These are not exotic species from remote jungles requiring expensive expeditions to find. These are plants that grow in pots on apartment balconies, plants you can buy at any garden center for $3. Plants that some of you already have sitting on your kitchen counter right now without any idea what they are truly capable of. There are 5 of them. Before you hear the names, there is something you need to understand first. There is a reason you have never heard this information framed this way, and that reason is not complicated. It is economics. A pharmaceutical antibiotic can be patented. A patented molecule generates exclusive revenue for 20 years. That exclusivity funds the research, the marketing, the sales force, and the lobbying that keeps the entire system running. A plant compound that has existed in the public domain for 4,000 years cannot be patented. Scientists who have studied these compounds have stated plainly that there is no commercial incentive to develop them because no patent protection is possible. No patent means no exclusive profit. No exclusive profit means no marketing budget. No marketing budget means no public awareness. This is not conspiracy. This is the documented incentive structure of pharmaceutical economics. Companies fund research that supports patentable products. They do not fund research into things that grow in a pot on a patio and come back every spring on their own. A plant that regenerates every year generates 0 recurring revenue. It cannot sustain a subscription model. It cannot support a sales force. It exists entirely outside the economic system that determines what gets researched, what gets funded, what gets marketed, and ultimately what you are allowed to learn about. That is why a compound that killed drug-resistant bacteria in a laboratory dish is still sitting on your spice rack labeled as pizza seasoning instead of being displayed behind the pharmacy counter. 5 plants, 5 antimicrobial systems your ancestors relied on for centuries, all confirmed by modern laboratory science, all growing in a pot by the end of this weekend. Here is the first one, and you almost certainly already have it in your kitchen. Picture a small glass jar on your spice rack, pushed behind the paprika, half empty, forgotten since last month when you sprinkled some on pasta. That jar contains dried leaves from a Mediterranean shrub called oregano. Most people reach for it a few times a month. Toss it on pizza, stir it into tomato sauce, never think about it beyond flavor. But in the mountains of Greece and along the rocky, sun-baked hillsides of southern Turkey, this plant was never just a seasoning. It was a first aid kit. Greek shepherds packed crushed fresh oregano leaves directly into open wounds on the mountainsides above Athens. Turkish villagers in rural Anatolia brewed it into strong bitter tea for respiratory infections and chest ailments. The name itself comes from 2 Greek words meaning joy of the mountain. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, documented oregano as an antiseptic treatment in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago. The compound responsible is called carvacrol. In simple terms, it is a molecule that punches holes in bacterial cell walls. When researchers tested essential oils from a wide range of common herbs to see which one was most effective at stopping bacterial growth, oregano came in first, not second, not tied for the lead, first. In laboratory petri dishes, carvacrol has shown strong antibacterial activity against MRSA. That is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, the drug-resistant superbug that hospitals around the world spend millions of dollars fighting every year. The compound disrupts the bacterial membrane and simultaneously interferes with the proteins bacteria need to survive. It attacks from multiple chemical angles at once. That complexity is exactly what makes it so difficult for bacteria to develop resistance. Oregano oil extracts have also demonstrated effectiveness against foodborne pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella in lab models. That half-empty jar of dried oregano on your shelf contains these same compounds. The fresh plant growing in a terracotta pot on a sunlit windowsill contains even more, and this plant is one of the simplest herbs on earth to grow. Oregano thrives in a 6-inch pot on any sunny windowsill. It tolerates drought. It tolerates poor soil. It actually prefers being neglected over being pampered. In warm climates, it is a perennial that returns every spring without replanting. In cold climates, it overwinters happily indoors next to a bright window. Cut it, and it grows back thicker. Dry the leaves, and they retain their compounds for months. Brew them into tea. Infuse them into olive oil. Cook with them daily. The delivery mechanism is the meal you were already going to make. Every Greek grandmother who packed oregano into a wound poultice on a mountainside above the Aegean Sea knew something that laboratory microbiologists confirmed 2,000 years later. The knowledge was never lost around the Mediterranean. It was lost in the countries that decided herbs belonged in the kitchen and nowhere else. Oregano kills bacteria by puncturing their walls, but the next plant does something even modern pharmaceutical antibiotics cannot do. It makes it nearly impossible for bacteria to develop resistance in the first place, and it earned its reputation on the battlefields of 2 world wars. 1858, Paris, France. The most famous microbiologist in human history places garlic juice into a dish of living bacteria inside his laboratory. The bacteria die. Louis Pasteur, the man who proved that germs cause disease, documents the result and moves on to other experiments. He had just performed one of the earliest recorded demonstrations of antibacterial activity in a common food plant. But Pasteur was not the first to notice. Garlic had already been used medicinally for over 3,000 years before he ever touched a clove. The Ebers Papyrus in ancient Egypt prescribed garlic for infections around 1500 BCE. Pliny the Elder in Rome documented it as treatment for dozens of conditions. Every major civilization on Earth independently arrived at the same conclusion: garlic fights infection. The compound responsible is called allicin. It does not exist inside a whole garlic clove sitting quietly on your counter. It is created the instant you crush or chop the clove. That sharp, familiar smell you recognize when you press garlic through a kitchen press is the allicin forming in real time. It is a chemical defense mechanism triggered by tissue damage, a sulfur-containing molecule designed by evolution to protect the plant from bacteria in the soil around its roots. Here is the finding that should have changed the entire conversation about antibiotics. Researchers determined that bacteria develop resistance to allicin approximately 1,000 times more slowly than they develop resistance to standard pharmaceutical antibiotics. 1,000 times. The chemical complexity of allicin makes it nearly impossible for bacteria to evolve a workaround through simple genetic mutation. Allicin showed activity against both major categories of disease-causing bacteria. It disrupts the enzymes bacteria need to function. It prevents biofilm formation, the slimy protective shields bacteria build around themselves to resist antibiotic treatment in chronic infections. And it interferes with quorum sensing, the chemical communication system bacteria use to coordinate their attacks inside your body. There is one catch: allicin is unstable. It breaks down rapidly when exposed to heat. The antimicrobial power exists in raw, freshly crushed garlic. Crush the clove. Wait 10 minutes for the allicin to fully form. Consume it before the compound degrades. Now consider the history that most people have never been taught. During World War I, before mass-produced antibiotics existed, the British government actually appealed for garlic supplies to use as a makeshift antiseptic raw dressing. It works well enough that the practice spread through military hospitals across the entire front. Decades later in World War II, when supplies ran desperately low on the Eastern Front, Soviet medical units relied heavily on garlic preparations to treat wounds, earning it the nickname Russian penicillin. In 1916, during the First World War, the British government issued a public appeal to its own citizens asking them to supply garlic cloves to help meet wartime medical demand. The most powerful empires on Earth in their most desperate hours turned to a plant bulb that grew in any kitchen garden. Then the wars ended. Pharmaceutical penicillin scaled into mass production in the late 1940s. Garlic went back to the kitchen. The medical establishment moved forward. Research funding chased the patentable molecules. Scientists studying allicin have stated plainly that no company has invested in developing it as a pharmaceutical product because no patent can be filed on a compound that has existed in the public domain for 5,000 years. Garlic grows in any pot at least 8 inches deep. Plant individual cloves in the fall with the pointed end facing up. They sit quietly through winter and produce full bulbs by the following summer. Each harvested bulb contains 6 to 10 new cloves ready for replanting. The crop multiplies itself. The medicine regenerates year after year without anyone purchasing a single thing. Garlic makes it nearly impossible for bacteria to fight back. But the next plant does something even more remarkable. It takes pharmaceutical antibiotics that have already stopped working and forces them to work again. And the compound responsible has been hiding in plain sight inside your mouthwash this entire time. The original formula for Listerine mouthwash was created in 1879. One of its key active ingredients was a compound called thymol. That compound comes directly from a small, woody herb called thyme. For over a century, people around the world have been swishing a thyme-derived chemical around their mouths twice a day, without ever connecting it to the plant growing wild on the hillsides of southern France. Thyme has been used medicinally since ancient Egypt, where it was part of the embalming process used to preserve the dead. Roman soldiers bathed in thyme-infused water before battle, believing it gave them courage and strength. Across rural France, England, and southern Europe, thyme tea was the standard household treatment for chest infections and persistent coughs for centuries, long before modern medicine existed. When researchers tested the antimicrobial properties of essential oils from a wide range of common plants, thyme essential oil demonstrated the strongest antibacterial activity against every bacterial species tested. It was effective against dangerous pathogens, including Staphylococcus aureus, Salmonella, Klebsiella, and Acinetobacter. But the real finding is what happened next. Researchers combined thymol at low concentrations with pharmaceutical antibiotics that had stopped working. In promising laboratory studies, when researchers combined thymol with certain failing antibiotics in petri dishes, they observed a synergistic effect, meaning the plant compound helped breach the bacteria's defenses, allowing the antibiotic to work at a significantly lower concentration. It did not simply add its own killing power. It restored the effectiveness of drugs that bacteria had already learned to survive. The mechanism is elegant. Thymol weakens the outer defenses of resistant bacteria. It disrupts their cell membranes and suppresses the resistance genes that protect them from antibiotic exposure. With those defenses down, the antibiotic that previously bounced off now penetrates and destroys. The plant compound acts as a battering ram that opens the gate for the pharmaceutical drug to walk through. This means researchers are looking at how compounds like thyme might someday be used alongside traditional antibiotics to help rescue their effectiveness in clinical settings. Thyme is one of the easiest herbs to grow in a container. It thrives in poor, dry, sandy soil. It prefers drought over overwatering. It is a perennial that lives for several years in most climates. A single small plant on a sunny patio produces enough fresh sprigs for daily use throughout the growing season. Harvest sprigs whenever you need them with kitchen scissors. Dry them for tea. Infuse them into raw honey. Add them to bone broth. Simmer them in soups. The delivery mechanism is the cup of tea or the bowl of soup you were already planning to make tonight. The pharmaceutical industry sells you the antibiotic in one bottle and the mouthwash containing the same antibacterial compound in another bottle. Both trace their chemistry to the same humble plant. Neither label mentions the herb growing wild on the hillside that started it all. Thyme rescues antibiotics that have stopped working, but the next plant has been fighting infections across an entire continent for over 4,000 years. Walk into any kitchen in India tonight and you will find it already sitting on the counter. Since at least 1900 BCE, nearly 4,000 years ago, Ayurvedic physicians across India prescribed a bright golden root for wound infections, skin diseases, respiratory ailments, digestive problems, and joint inflammation. This is not folk memory fading through oral tradition. This is documented in some of the oldest surviving medical texts on the face of the earth. In India, they call it haldi. It sits in a small container in nearly every kitchen across the subcontinent. Mothers apply fresh turmeric paste to their children's scrapes and cuts before reaching for anything else. In Indian weddings, brides are covered in turmeric paste during the haldi ceremony, a tradition rooted in the ancient understanding that this golden root protects the skin from infection. In Southeast Asia, turmeric treats stomach infections and digestive complaints. In Okinawa, Japan, home to one of the longest-lived populations on the planet, turmeric tea is consumed daily by elders who routinely live past 100. Across the Middle East and South Asia, families have stirred turmeric into warm milk with honey for generations as a remedy for sore throats and chest infections. The active compound that gives turmeric its deep golden color is called curcumin. It attacks bacteria through 3 simultaneous mechanisms. It disrupts the bacterial cell membrane. It prevents bacteria from forming biofilms, the protective colonies that make chronic infections so difficult to treat with pharmaceutical drugs. And it induces oxidative stress inside the bacterial cell, overwhelming the organism from within. Curcumin showed activity in laboratory tests against Staphylococcus aureus, E. coli, Pseudomonas, and Helicobacter pylori, the bacterium behind most stomach ulcers worldwide. It also showed promise against Mycobacterium tuberculosis. When curcumin was combined with existing tuberculosis drugs, the effectiveness increased beyond what either treatment achieved alone. There is a well-known limitation. Curcumin has low bioavailability when eaten on its own. Your liver breaks it down rapidly before your body can fully use it. But Indian cooks solved this problem centuries ago without knowing any biochemistry. They combined turmeric with black pepper in virtually every dish they made. The piperine in black pepper blocks the liver enzyme that destroys curcumin and dramatically increases absorption. They did not understand the molecular mechanism. They simply observed across generations that it worked better with pepper, and modern researchers confirmed they were exactly right. Turmeric grows beautifully in containers in any warm environment. It thrives indoors near a bright window. Plant the rhizomes in spring in a large pot of rich, moist soil. After 8 to 10 months, dig up the rhizomes and you will find they have multiplied underground. One piece becomes 5 or 6. The medicine manufactures more of itself beneath the soil while you go about your life. Grate it fresh into curries and soups. Brew golden milk with warmed milk, raw honey, freshly cracked black pepper, and grated turmeric root. Dry it and grind it to powder. The delivery system has been perfected by 4,000 years of South Asian home cooking. Over 1 billion people on this planet eat turmeric every single day. They are not waiting for a pharmaceutical company to validate what their grandmothers taught them at the kitchen counter. Turmeric has been fighting infections across Asia for 40 centuries. But the final plant on this list carries the most devastating story of all 5. It was once the single most prescribed plant medicine in the entire United States of America. Then antibiotics arrived. And within 20 years, it was deliberately erased from American medicine. Before antibiotics existed, American doctors prescribed a plant, not something imported from a distant continent, not an exotic remedy from a foreign tradition. A native North American wildflower that grew on the Great Plains from the Dakotas down to Texas. Tall stems crowned with striking purple petals radiating outward from a spiny copper-colored cone. The purple cone flower, Echinacea. Native American nations used this plant for centuries before European settlers ever arrived on the continent. The Lakota used it for pain. The Kiowa used it for coughs and sore throats. The Cheyenne chewed the root for throat infections. The Pawnee used it for headaches. Mothers across dozens of Great Plains tribes packed it into wounds, insect bites, and burns. It was the most widely used medicinal plant among the indigenous nations of the American interior. European settlers took notice. In 1885, a folk doctor named H.C.F. Meyer in Pawnee City, Nebraska began promoting Echinacea preparations to the public. By the early 1900s, a group of physicians called the Eclectics Doctors who practiced both pharmaceutical and botanical medicine adopted echinacea as their most important clinical tool. Through the 1920s, echinacea was the most prescribed plant-derived medicine in the entire United States. It held official status in the U.S. National Formulary from 1916 to 1950. American doctors wrote prescriptions for it. American pharmacies stocked it on their shelves. American patients took it for infections of every kind. Echinacea works differently from the other plants on this list. Rather than directly killing bacteria, it is widely studied for its potential to support the body's natural immune response. It stimulates your body's own defense systems to fight infections more aggressively. Research shows it increases the production of white blood cells, the immune warriors that hunt down and destroy invading bacteria. It strengthens the body's own internal defense cascade from the inside out. This distinction matters enormously. Pharmaceutical antibiotics attack bacteria directly. They do nothing to make your immune system stronger. Echinacea strengthens the host rather than targeting the invader. In an era when bacteria are learning to resist every direct chemical attack we throw at them, boosting the body's own defenses becomes a strategy bacteria cannot develop resistance against. You cannot become resistant to someone else's immune system getting stronger. Then sulfa drugs arrived in the 1930s. Penicillin scaled into mass production in the 1940s. The American medical establishment had its new miracle molecules, and echinacea, the most widely prescribed plant medicine in the country, was quietly dropped. It was removed from the national formulary by 1950. Within a single generation, American doctors forgot this plant existed. An entire system of botanical medicine that had served American families for over 50 years was replaced by patented synthetic molecules in less than 2 decades. The plant itself never disappeared. It kept growing on the same prairies where the Lakota had harvested it for centuries before any European ever set foot on the continent. Purple cone flowers still bloom across the Great Plains of Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas every July and August. The plant was never extinct, only the memory was. Meanwhile, in Germany, where herbal medicine never left mainstream medical practice, researchers continued studying echinacea quietly throughout the entire 20th century. Today, echinacea is sold back to American consumers as a supplement in a brown glass dropper bottle at a significant markup by companies that profit from knowledge American physicians once provided to their patients for free. Echinacea is a native perennial wildflower. It is drought tolerant. It grows from a deep taproot that anchors it through brutal prairie winters. It thrives in poor soil and full sun. It is one of the most important pollinator plants in North American native gardens. Every bee in your neighborhood will find it before you even notice the first bloom. Grow it in a PUT at least 12 inches deep to accommodate the taproot. Harvest flowers and leaves in the second year for tea. Dig roots in the third year for tinctures. Allow it to drop seed and the patch expands on its own year after year. The most prescribed plant medicine in American history is now a $3 seed packet at the hardware store down the road. Nobody profits when you know that. That is 5 plants. 5 completely different antimicrobial systems covering 5 distinct mechanisms. Membrane disruption from oregano, resistance prevention from garlic, antibiotic synergy from thyme, biofilm destruction from turmeric, immune amplification from echinacea. No single pharmaceutical product on any pharmacy shelf anywhere in the world addresses all 5 at the same time. You do not need a farm, you do not need a backyard, you do not need raised beds or a greenhouse. You need 5 pots and a sunny patio or a south-facing windowsill and 1 free afternoon. Oregano in a small clay pot, sunny, dry, happily ignored, thyme right beside it in the same conditions. They are Mediterranean neighbors in the wild, and they will be Mediterranean neighbors on your windowsill. Garlic in a deeper pot, at least 8 inches tall, planted in fall with pointed ends facing the sky. You harvest full bulbs by the following summer. Turmeric in a large pot indoors or in a warm, sheltered corner of your patio. Give it humidity and warmth, and it will multiply underground. Echinacea in the deepest pot you own. Give it room, give it sun. Step back and let it do what prairie wildflowers have been doing for thousands of years without any help from anyone. 5 pots, 5 plants. Total cost for seeds and rhizomes and starter cloves is under $20 one time. That is less than a single copay at most pharmacies in this country. While a kitchen garden is a beautiful, sustainable way to enjoy these fresh herbs and integrate their traditional wellness benefits into your daily cooking, it's important to remember they are a complement to, not a replacement for modern medical care when serious infections strike. Your grandmother probably knew at least one of these plants. In the hills outside Athens, she packed oregano into scrapes that bled. In a kitchen in Seoul or Mumbai, she crushed raw garlic onto cuts that needed cleaning. In a village in Rajasthan, she mixed turmeric paste for every bruise her children brought home from the fields. On the open prairies of Nebraska, she brewed echinacea tea for the sore throats that arrived with every winter. In a stone cottage in the English countryside, she steeped thyme for the cough that would not quit. This knowledge was not destroyed by conspiracy, it was displaced by economics. A plant that grows in a pot generates no recurring revenue. A compound that cannot be patented cannot be marketed. What cannot be marketed fades from public consciousness within 3 generations. 3 generations is exactly how long it has been, but the plants did not disappear. Oregano still grows wild across every rocky hillside ringing the Mediterranean Sea. Garlic still multiplies underground in every climate zone on Earth. Thyme still blankets the dry, sunny hills of Provence in southern Turkey. Turmeric still spreads through the warm soil of 1 billion kitchens across India. Echinacea still blooms purple every July across the windswept Great Plains of North America. The plants were never the problem. The forgetting was the problem. And forgetting is entirely reversible. Start with 1 pot this weekend, 1 plant. Watch it grow through a single season, then add a second, then a third. By the time all 5 are established and returning on their own each spring, you will stop seeing a few pots on a patio. You will start seeing a pharmacy that feeds the bees and never needs a refill. The seeds cost almost nothing. The soil asks only that you leave it alone. The plants ask only that you remember them. They have been waiting on mountainsides and in garden centers and across open prairies this entire time. And don't forget, if you want to grow what the healthiest people on the planet are growing and start living like them, the Centenarian's Garden has got you covered. Go show them some love.